This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, I'm Stephen from CIM Services. In this session, I'm going to cover Sage 200, VAT returns and submissions. I'm going to try and go into a little bit more detail than what you might get from the help file, and hopefully it'll be useful for you. If you've never done a VAT return in Sage 200, or if you have, then it might give you some other extra pointers as well. So I'm going to go through the VAT return in Sage 200. We're going to use this PowerPoint here that I prepared to give me my agenda that I'm going to go through in this session. And I'm going to start with just going through the agenda. So before we complete our VAT return, then we've got preparation work to do. So I'm going to go through the preparation that it's not necessarily mandatory, but it will be worth doing. Give you some tips on that. Obviously, a lot of it is in the preparation. Once you've completed your VAT return, you can't uncomplete it. You can't return back unless you do a restore. So it's best to make sure that everything's prepped and completed before we complete the VAT return. So that's a key area to focus on. Then we move on to actually completing the VAT return. What does the VAT return do? So we'll go through the outcomes, the consequences of doing the VAT return, and go through some post-completion checks. So things just to make sure that once it's done, it's been completed properly and there's not been any problems before we can then move on and use Sage 200 again, knowing that the VAT return is completed successfully. We've got an extra section on group submissions as well, for those who need to do a group MTD submission. Sage do have a separate MTD submission tool for group submissions, so I'll have a quick go through that, and there is a Q&A mention there, but that's not something I'll be actually doing today. Okay, so starting with preparation. Obviously, if you use Sage 200 on a daily basis and you've done VAT returns before, you'll know this, but just to be clear, you want to make sure that when you're completing your VAT return before you've completed it, you want to make sure that everything that should be in that VAT return has been processed through Sage. So anything should be posted, entered, and completed to make sure that it's included. So post any outstanding transactions, invoice and post any sales dispatches, sales orders that you've done, put any purchase invoices on that you've received in, etc., etc. Any journals that have VAT on them, so that they'll get included. Okay, and then we'll go through a little bit about group submissions at this point because it is part of the preparation. It's more of a one-off thing, but once you've got it set correctly, then you don't need to worry about it, but it's very key to make sure that you're set up correctly before you start doing your VAT returns. So if you are in a group VAT situation, then you need to combine the VAT totals from more than one company. If not, then we just have, for each Sage company that you have, we have to just submit the figures that are in that particular company. So if you're not group VAT, what we can do is in Sage, we can do the submission as part of completing the VAT return. Okay, and the figures that you have on your VAT return would then get posted over to HMRC, and it's all done in one go. If you are group VAT, then you can't do that because the figures in that particular company obviously need to combine with other companies as well. So we don't do the MTD submission as part of the VAT return. If I go into Sage and look in the Nominal Ledger, each module has a setup screen. that is located in Utilities, Ledger Setup, and here we go. This is the setup screen for the Nominal Ledger. Ledger Settings, and you'll see on the very end there's a tab there for VAT Submissions. Now, the first two tick boxes are what relate to doing the online submission. The first one, if you're not in the group VAT situation, we want to tick this to enable online VAT submissions. And that means that when we complete the VAT return, it will then try and submit those figures. If you don't have that ticked, it will just complete the VAT return and not do any submission at this point. And obviously, if you do want to, you do have to submit your figures to HMRC. If it doesn't do that, that's a bit of a problem. So it's worth making sure that that is ticked. In my particular version of Sage 200, I do have a second tick box. It seems a bit of a duplication really, but we tick it to say, yeah, submit as a digital record as part of making tax digital. So before MTD, then you could always do online VAT submissions. So the first tick box was still applicable. As part of the switch over to MTD, then you had the second tick box to say, right now, those VAT submissions are not the old gateway, it's going to be the new MTD gateway. So sure, most if not every company now will be moving into MTD submissions, so you would tick that. There are some earlier versions in the one I'm on where there's no tick box for this. There's another way to enable MTD submissions, but I won't go through that particular detail at the moment. It's something you can get in touch with our support for if you need any help with that, if you don't have the second tick box. On top of that, we can enable online VAT payments as well, where we can actually make the payment to HMRC as well as the submission. So in order to do that, then we tell Sage, you can see the details below, what the bank details are for HMRC, and it will make a nominal payment. And it can be can also produce an e-banking file so that the payment isn't exactly done online, but it produces a banking file that you can import into your bank account to process the payment. Okay, so the details you would choose here are which bank account you would want to pay out of and what would be the VAT liability account, because it's going to produce a nominal payment, and so it wants to know basically what's the other side of the entry. So I've put it in there, my VAT liability account 26700. On top of that, we've just got some extra details at the bottom. Nothing, no security information. There's no credentials in there for the gateway. You have to enter those in at the time you do the submission, but it's just it's got a few bits that will save you time entering at that point, so it can be stored. And in this case, I am going to have this enabled for online VAT submissions. I'm not actually going to make a submission to HMRC, as you can imagine. It's not. I've got demo data here. This is Sage's demo data company, Homestar Kitchens, and obviously I don't want to submit this for real to HMRC. I will start to go down the road of doing it, the route, and I'll show you as far as I can what happens, but then I'll have to cancel out. But we will set ourselves up as if we're not in group VAT at this point. Okay, save that change. Okay, so we've checked the setup is correct. The other things in preparation are check that you got the correct VAT period end date. It can be changed to the right one if it's wrong. So hopefully it will be right, but it's always worth making sure. And if we go into period end routines in Nominal Ledger, you have your VAT analysis screen. This is where we do our VAT return from, but is also where I can check the VAT period. So my VAT period is set to the 30th of September 2017. So it's a little bit older than what we're actually into at the moment. I'm sure that the VAT returns that you'll be doing will be a lot later than this, but the demo data is based around that sort of time frame. So ignore the fact that it's 2017. The main thing to concentrate on is that we're looking at that quarter through from the 1st of July to the 30th of September. Incidentally, the nominal periods that my financial year that I'm in this demo data is actually 2018. Again, don't worry too much about that. So you might notice that that's the case, but it's just because that's the data that I have where you've got some significant amount of transactions and values going to the VAT return are around this time frame. Okay, so we've checked that our period return is correct, that we're including anything up until the 30th of September 2017. So we say 200, although if I go to the third tab, completed period totals, you can see the previous VAT return is period ending, this was actually June, period ending the 30th of June, which means we're going to be including any transactions that follow on from that from the 1st of July up until that end date of the 30th of September, but it doesn't exclude anything before the 30th of June. So if since this VAT return was completed, if I've put anything on dated June 2017 or earlier, then this VAT return will still pick that up. So that's why when you look at the period up to on this tab or over here, then it will be the end date that you'll see, not the start date, because there is no effective start date. It's anything up until that date. So you don't have to worry too much about anything that's been put on that should have gone into another VAT return that didn't. It will still get picked up in the next one. Okay, so that's checked. We're happy with that. Our VAT return is for the right period. Okay, so what we can do is print off some reports. So when you do complete your VAT return, we'll see shortly that you do get reports listing summary information of your VAT totals by code and your box totals, things like that. But you've also got the option to print that before you actually complete the VAT return to make sure that you're happy that we've included everything correctly. So there's a couple of reports that can be printed off. Again, if we go into the VAT analysis screen, there's a print button here, which is literally just printing the summary totals for input, output, goods and VAT per VAT code. But if you go to the second tab, the current period return, you also have a print button here. This will potentially give you 3 prints when you click on it. One of them would be the tax return itself, which you can see, which will be kind of in the format of the old tax return when it was paper-based, with the box totals on there. And a second report, which will give you a list of all the transactions that would have been included in this VAT return, but they're not, because the VAT code that they were coded to has been set not to be included in the VAT return. So it's trying to tell you, right, these transactions, they would have been in the VAT return, they will be eligible for it based on the date of them, but because of the VAT code that they've been assigned to, they've been coded to, is not part of the VAT return, then they won't be on there. So it's making you aware that they are there, so you can address that if that is wrong. Obviously, it could be quite right. I haven't got any of those. All of my tax codes are included in the VAT return, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so I've got a message saying that there is basically nothing to be generated because there isn't anything to show you. So I'll OK that, and then I'll get one more report, which is a list of the VAT transactions which are included in this VAT return. So these are grouped by VAT code, and we can see it starts with VAT code 1 with your URN and other details, and then input or output goods or VAT values. And if I go through, there will be a lot for 1. And then we can see we have subtotals for each VAT code. So there's VAT code 1, then we move on to VAT code 2, 4, and so on. And then at the end, VAT code 7. Okay, so that's a breakdown that then the totals of those should agree back. I close that and that to these period totals here, which then transpose into your box totals over here. You can also access the information in different ways. So if we look at box total, then you can see that's broken down. If I click on it, that's a hyperlink. Blue with an underline means you can click on it and you can then break that down into its constituent parts. So we can see it's made up of the goods of VAT values that have gone to each of these VAT codes here. And if you click on one, then the middle section will show you again those transactions that are making up that that subtotal figure. And then you can right click, you can print, or you can maybe preferably export all to Excel and print from there, or save it and keep that for reference. So other ways of extracting these details out of Sage into onto a print or another electronic format. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward so far. If we go back to PowerPoint, just to give us a bit of guidance where we're up to. So yeah, I was going to mention about codes that are included or not included in the VAT return. We actually move away from the nominal ledger, into the accounting system manager here. And if we go into, let's just close these down to start with. We go into accounting system manager settings, then you have VAT rates. And you can add your own VAT rates, but these are the VAT rates that we have with the demo data company. And these will be just the default VAT rates that you get with Sage. So we have the same list of VAT rates that you see on the VAT analysis. The thing is, the reason I'm in here is just to show you this VAT return column here is where you can set the VAT code to be included or excluded from the VAT return. So you can see they've all got ticks on mine, but if any of these codes were set up without a tick, so they're outside of the scope of VAT perhaps, any transactions that would have hit the VAT return, but based on the date, but are assigned to a VAT code that is not ticked in here to be included in the VAT return would have come out on that report. So if you're wondering where that would come from, it would be based on this. Okay. Right, so another area we want to focus on today, which is probably quite an important one that doesn't really get covered off too much by the help files, is reconciling your VAT. So before you complete your VAT return, you would likely want to make sure that the figures that you're going to submit to HMRC are correct. So there's a couple of different exercises that you can do to compare your figures on the VAT return as we've just seen them and printed them off to other areas of Sage to make sure that they agree and make sure that we've captured hopefully everything we should be. Okay, so going back to Sage, what we've got, the first option here for reconciliation is VATable transaction reports versus the VAT return transactions print. So the VAT return transactions print, the one we just seen where it's a breakdown group by VAT code of every transaction, every posting that's gone to each VAT code that's going to be included in the VAT return in that particular return, and the nominal VATable transactions report, I will show you those, and we can use those to compare against those that VAT return transactions print to make sure they agree. Okay, just close that back up. Starting with the nominal ledger, what you can do is you can compare within each ledger against the VAT return. So the VAT return is using information that's held in separate tables in the Sage database. So whenever you post transactions with VAT on, the information will go to the various ledgers, sales, purchase, nominal, cash book, and it will also post the VAT information to the VAT tables. So the VAT return is using those VAT tables, but each of those ledgers will have similar information in them to keep a track of the VATable amount related to transactions. And we can use reports from those areas then to compare back to the VAT return to make sure that the two agree with each other, they can be reconciled. Starting with the nominal ledger, if we look in reports, accounts analysis, then you will see there's a non-trading VATable transactions report. If we click on that, this particular report will ask us actually the same question really is what we're looking at on the VAT return is what's the VAT period end date. So it's using the current period. You could look at historical ones, or the last entry is anything that is in a future period, so anything that comes after the 30th of September 2017, and it's got like a nominal date on this. It's got a date that is basically 100 years in the future, just to make sure that it has got a date on it and it's far enough in order to capture everything. Okay, but we're going to use the 30th of September because that's the VAT return period that we were trying to reconcile to. And if I click OK on that, I don't have very much in this data, but I've got hopefully enough to show you to illustrate what the report would do. So that's going to give you every transaction that had VAT on it that was posted through the nominal ledger, which is mainly really journals. So where the source was the nominal ledger, this will give you a list of all those entries. So we've got some purchase VAT journals. You can see the transaction type there with the breakdown, the net VAT and the total, and then there's subtotaled at the bottom by month. So you can see these are calendar month of July, August, September, and we've got VAT total for each of minus 64.54. Now, in order to sort of make it easier and speed things up, what I've done is prepared the figures I'm going to use in my reports in an Excel spreadsheet, so it's easier for us to just quickly compare. Okay, so here's the spreadsheet. And you can see the VATable transactions report. What I've done is I put those 64.54s in there. Okay, on the VAT return, I can go back and check, but basically the output and input VAT for the period I've listed up here, 458,969.53 for output and 187,306.46 for input. And so those are the figures that in total we want to agree back to. Okay, so anything that's been posted through the nominal, we can pick up on this report. Anything that's posted through sales and purchase ledger, then, or that's come from sales orders, purchase orders, they would be, you could retrieve those through the corresponding reports in the respective ledgers. So for sales transactions, again, you can go into accounts analysis and you'll have a VATable transactions report. And they'll be the same in the purchase ledger in the same area. Or you could actually just do a search on here and we can see VATable transactions, sales ledger, VATable transactions, purchase ledger, and you can open it up from there. Now, the sales and purchase ones, they work slightly differently, which means they're not really ideal. If you see, it's not asking us for a VAT return date anymore. So what we have to use is right down the bottom, you have a transaction date. So now I have to fix a date. So I have to say, right, this is between, and obviously my period is the quarter from the 1st of July to 30th of September 17. Now what you'll notice, as I said earlier, is with the VAT return, it can pick up anything prior to the 1st of July, that hasn't already been included in the VAT return. But because I have to put the date on here, if I go any earlier, it's going to include transactions that are from the June VAT return. So I have to start from the 1st of July in order to capture the VATable transactions from the sales ledger for this particular period. So it does leave open for a discrepancy here, because anything that's been dated June that's going to be included in my September VAT return or earlier than June will be in the VAT return, but it won't be in this report. So it's worth keeping that in mind. These aren't an exact comparison, so you might find that the differences are there for good reason, not because you've done anything wrong, but because they work in a slightly different way. They're not an exact comparison. Okay, but then all the transactions that relate with VAT on them will be listed in here, grouped by the customer. And then if I scroll down the bottom again, you get the subtotals by month. Okay, so I've taken those VAT figures there and I've transposed those into this column here for July, August, September. And purchase ledger, I've done the same. It's the same report really, but obviously on the purchasing side. And oops, I have to do the same thing. I have to specifically set a date range. So 1st to 7th, 17th, 30th to 9th, 17th. But otherwise, the format will look the same as what we saw on the sales one. And if I go down to the end, you can see we've got it grouped by month, and I transpose those totals into here. So we have a total for nominal, sales ledger, purchase ledger, VAT, and because the nominal ledger journals were purchase related, then I've added the nominal figure to the purchase figure. And if I compare them to my output VAT, the VAT return 458969, I've got a rounding difference slightly, so we have a penny difference there. But in this case, actually, other than that, we agree perfectly to our VAT. Let's go back to the menu. So just to show you the figures I got from VAT return onto Excel, 458,969.53. I'm just going to take it from here and here, but obviously you could take it from the period return as well, here and here. Okay, so that's one reconciliation done. As I say, it's not, they don't provide the perfect reports to make this reconciliation, but hopefully that will help. But there is a better report that can help you if you are finding differences. So let's move on to the next item. What we can also do is we can reconcile our nominal ledger to VAT, because as well as tracking the individual transactions through the other ledgers, everything will end up in the nominal against our nominal VAT accounts. In this demo data, we've got an input VAT and output VAT. So again, we could, in theory, we can reconcile the postings to the nominal to the VAT return. And obviously, it's the same sort of scope really for there being a difference, because you can have a VAT return quarter like I have for July, August, September, but depending on when the periods were closed, the transactions that would fall into that VAT return may not have actually gone into the corresponding period in the nominal. So we might be completing the VAT return up to the 30th of September, and a transaction dated the 30th September would be included in that, but that might have been posted after the September nominal period was closed. So we could find that actually the nominal period for September doesn't include that transaction because it's gone into October, but the VAT return does include it. So again, there's scope for differences in when you're reconciling, and we we do have a difference, we want to know where that difference is coming from. And I think this one can help us. So what we'll do is we'll compare the nominal ledger first. We'll get those figures and we'll run another report to compare to that. So back to Sage. Now, if I go to the nominal list, there's different ways of doing this. You could obviously run a trial balance and do it that way. I just got to double check. I don't want that one. Yeah, I do want that will do. If I scroll down a bit, you can see I made a note of this already, but I'm also using this to remind me what account it is. So for output VAT, I'm using nominal code 26100. So I'll just put that into my search. There it is. Now, the way I'm going to do this is through the account inquiry. If we look in the account inquiry for the nominal ledger account, then on the budgets tab, there's not just budgets on there, you actually have balances. As I said at the start, we're in this company, we're in the next financial year, we're in 2018. So the balance this year isn't actually applicable. We want to go back to last year. So balance last year, and we're January to December. So we're talking about periods 7 to 9, starting at 144436383, 154812666, and 1596930. And if I show you this spreadsheet, then I've already built those figures in, into here. Okay, and if I do a similar exercise on the input VAT, you can see I've just typed in the right code because you've got the right name up the top there. And again, I just look at the balance last year. So we have, 39656, 50802, and 96696, which I've brought in here. Okay, so far so good. And if I add those up, we have 458,969.53. Let's just compare that back at the top. Output VAT, yep, that's fine. And then on the input VAT, I've got 187,155.69. Well, that's actually different to our input VAT total on the VAT return, 187,306.46. So I'm just going to work out the difference. It's 150.77. And obviously all these figures, the nominal and the VAT, work in base currency, which will be sterling. So we are comparing like for like on that respect. So we've got a difference of £150.77. And at this point, we don't know where that is coming from. We've got the ability to go and look at the transactions on the nominal that I've posted for those 3 periods, and run a list off of the VAT return and compare, and that would be a lovely job for someone to go and tick and bash and try and find out which one of those transactions is missing. So not particularly great way of doing it. Something that could help you, if I just go back to Sage, it's in the period end routines along with the VAT analysis. Actually, it's the next option down on the menu, report VAT transactions by period. So it's not in the report section, but it is a report and it does relate to the VAT. And it's useful because it will give us a breakdown of our VAT return, each of the postings, in the right kind of way for us to reconcile to the nominal. So we choose the tax period, that's our VAT return date, so it's picking up the current date by default. You can choose whether you want to include just the ones that are going to be included in the VAT return, or the ones that aren't, or all of them. That makes no difference to me. All of mine are going to be included in the VAT return, so I'll just leave it as all. Okay, so when I run this report, it looks quite similar to some of the other ones, but the key to it is that we're actually relating it back. Each of these VAT postings is related back to the nominal, and which nominal period it's been posted into. So firstly, we're not grouping by VAT code, but we're grouping by the nominal accounting period that it posted into. And so if there was anything that happened to have gone into an earlier nominal period somehow, like if it's a VAT transaction that didn't get included in the previous return, and then it has gone into, say, the June 2017 period, then that would be listed first. As it is, the earliest period that anything that's in this VAT return has gone to is period 7, July, and then within that is then grouped by VAT code. We've got a lot of VAT code 1 stuff going through July, but there we go. We get through each VAT code, which has got its own subtotal, and then we get to the subtotal for the period as a whole. So there's our totals for period 7. 1444, 6383, and 39656.89. And again, I've already put this into Excel for us to make it easiest to track. And there's the period 7 totals, and then I'm just going to repeat that for, we'll have period 8, I've just whooshed past it. We're nearly there. There we go. So for period 8, we have these totals, and all these are already in Excel. And then we should, if everything was done without any complications, then we should find we've only got postings to 3 periods. Period 9 would be our last one. As we go through. There we go. I kind of spoiled my big reveal because you can see that isn't the last one. So we take our figures for period 9 and we can put those in. But in fact, this report has shown us we do have some other entries that have gone into period 10, October 2017. And guess what? There's 150.77 total in there. So if I scroll down, you can see, actually that's wrong. We've got 150.77 in October. So if I add up those subtotals for each of those other 3 periods, plus the one in October, then we come to the right figure. We agree there's no difference between sales total here and our output VAT on the VAT return, and the input VAT 187,306.46 agrees here. So we've managed to use that report to help us to reconcile it. We can see why there's a difference between if we directly compare to the nominal and the VAT return. And then I'm sure if I interrogate those, I'll find that, yeah, the nominal period for September was closed before those went on. So hence why they've gone into October. Okay, so it's a useful report to be aware of. Finally, looking at EC sales, we should, again, in theory, be able to compare the VAT return box total 8 in total to the EC sales for the same periods for in this case, the quarter from July through to September. And usually the EC sales is going to be a monthly thing. So you typically would be maybe taking each one of those periods and adding them up. But you can run the EC sales for more than one period at a time. So what we'll do is we'll try and reconcile the EC sales to the current period return box 8. So if I go back to Sage and let's close this report. Back to the VAT return. Okay, so box 8, 109,432. And we're not concerned about the pennies here. If I scroll back up, I don't have the matching figure in there. That's interesting. Let's put it in like that to match what we've got, and hopefully it will agree. And then we can run our EC sales reports and see if we get the same figure. Now, as standard, your EC sales stage doesn't really give you a lot. It gives you the ability to produce the XML file that you can then upload to HMRC. There's no, that's not particularly legible as it is, and there's no report equivalent to that. So they don't make it the easiest thing to reconcile, but we're going to produce an EC sales list. Okay, so I'm going to produce, there's going to be some dummy information here, but basically we need to tell it which quarter we're doing it for. So that's going to be Q3. First calendar month will be July, and we can do it for 3 months in the calendar year 2017. So it's basically July 17 for 3 months, July, August, September. And I think I've got to fill this in just to put something in, and I can generate that. So it's asking me where to put the file. I think what I do is I've got a location within the Sage folder that I'm going to store it. I'll overwrite this one I've got here. Right, that's done. So that's the first step in producing our EC sales, but we're none the wiser as to whether it agrees to the VAT at the moment. Now, what Sage do provide is a viewer that allows you to read that XML file and make it a bit more easy to work with. I've actually saved the XML file in a folder where my EC sales viewer is. So you can just run it separately, or it can be added to the Sage menu so that you can then, once you produce the XML file, you can then from the menu you could run this viewer. But I'm just going to do it the simple way for the moment and just run it from the folder. Just take a second to open up. I say a second, more like 20. When you run this for the first time, you have to tell it where to expect the XML file to be, and then it will remember it. So then when you open up, it'll automatically look in that location. I'm just trying to think whether I've got it set to the right place. Nope. So let's just point it to the same place where I've just saved the XML file. Okay. So we haven't got a total on here, but what we can see is a breakdown of each of the totals by country and tax registration number. So we've got 4 different totals on here, so not a great deal, but you do have print and export options on here as well. So what I've done in Excel, I've already taken these totals, and I wonder if they all agree, so I need to double check this. 38677, 13862, 29229, 23993. Now I've actually got a difference on here of a few thousand, so there must be something included in the VAT return that isn't included in the EC sales. Now I can't think there isn't by default. I think I've got a custom one somewhere that will allow us to do a similar sort of reconciliation as what we just did on the nominal side, comparing the nominal ledger to the VAT return, and using that VAT transactions by period report to break down the VAT return figure to find out where the difference is. As standard, there isn't a report that does it. I've got one somewhere that I've written that allows us to do it, but it's not as part of a standard Sage suite of reports. So I'm not going to try and reconcile this figure right now, but obviously without having anything customized for us, then obviously one way you can do it would be to, if we go into the nominal ledger and we go to our VAT return, and that would help if I was in the right place. We break down the box total 8 and we see if there's anything in there that either doesn't match the date range, so we've got our dates here, or if there is anything, if there's nothing that jumps out, then we would look at, you know, other areas, like then exporting this over to Excel and then subtotaling by the customer, because then you start to see the same subtotals that you see on EC sales. I can actually see that we've got a couple of other entries in here that are dated 2016. So goodness knows why we got something so old on this one, but obviously it's not real world data. It's more thinking about the concepts of, you know, reconciliation, or not too much about the dates. But we can see straight away that the reason why these are in the VAT return is because they haven't been included already in a previous VAT return, and they wouldn't be on the EC sales because we ran the EC sales for July through to September 2017 specifically, so they are going to be outside of that range. So I imagine the difference is going to be because of these two transactions. So again, I'm not going to go further into the reconciliation to just prove that difference, but we can see it's a useful reconciliation to do to make sure that both EC sales and VAT return make sense, but there's reasons why they may not agree, and you know, there's ways and means to start interrogating the VAT return to try and find the difference. If you're interested in the custom report that I mentioned that allows us to more easily reconcile the difference, then just get in contact with me and I'm sure I can make that available to you. Okay, so we've done a lot of work on preparation. Once we've reconciled everything, then we can move on to actually completing the VAT return. Okay, so when we're completing the VAT return, the first thing is we want to make sure that all users are out of Sage. To be able to get into the VAT return, there's a lot of screens which might prevent you getting in. If someone's in the middle of entering something that could affect the VAT return, then Sage won't let you go into it. If you're going to get people out for that reason, you may as well just get everybody out, because you know there's quite a list of things, of screens that the VAT return will check to see if they're open before letting you go in. So you may as well just, rather than worry about which ones people are in, just if you've got everybody out, then it makes sure firstly that no one's going to prevent you getting into the VAT return screen, and secondly, it feeds into the third point on here, is that we want, before we complete the VAT return, we want to do a backup. So if you've got people working in Sage, something goes wrong when you're completing the VAT return, your backup will then not reflect anything that they've been working on. So it's best to get people out, back up, do the VAT return, check everything's okay before letting people back in, and then if there was an issue, the restore won't cause you to lose anything. Okay, so all users out of Sage. Even if people are outside of Sage, except yourself, you might still find you can't get in the VAT return. This is usually down to disconnected logins, which is where if a user hasn't closed Sage properly, so perhaps they were in Sage, they crashed out, they had a network issue, you know, it was being slow, they just wanted to close it, they just cleared it off without closing it down properly, then that becomes what's known in Sage as a disconnected login. They might have had screens open as well. So if that's the case, there's not only a disconnected login, but all these disconnected screens related to it. And if that is the case, and those screens include ones that stop you going in the VAT return, then it means that you could have everybody out of Sage, and you could still find that you can't get into your VAT return because it says so-and-so is in when they're not. So when you get that situation, assuming you have permissions to do this, the easiest way is from these more recent versions of Sage. If you're on anything from 2015 onwards, then you'll have a cog in the top right corner of your main menu, and you have user login status available to select from up there. This will give you, it's called user login status. It does two things. One is to tell you your user login status, but actually the thing it brings up first is a list of any of your disconnected logins, and you can see I've actually got one there. So it's not just something to see, it's something to actually remove. In order to get past this, if this is causing you a problem, or even if it's not, it's always recommended to clear these down on a regular basis. So as part of your month-end procedure, I recommend that you review these. Someone would just look in here and see if there are any and get rid of them. So what I've only got one here, so I can only show you this one, but what you would do is you highlight the line and you would click log off to clear the disconnected logon. You can highlight multiple, so if you've got tens of them in there, lots and lots, then rather than do one at a time, you can use your control and your shift keys to help you then multi-select. So you could do the whole lot, highlight them all, and then click log off, and it will get rid of all of the disconnected logons in one go. Okay, I just got this one to do, so clear that. Okay, there's nothing left to show, so we've completed that task. Okay, so we've got everyone out of Sage. Sorry, forgot to mention while you're in there, back into user login status. The second tab is where you can double check to make sure that everybody is out of Sage. So you can go off this last activity. It's pretty easier to see that than it is to see the login status of being logged on or logged off. If they're logged on, then there will be a date and time in that last activity. So that's a very easy way of checking who's in, and you can sort by that. So if you sort descending, then the people who are still logged in at the top, you can see it's only me that's in, so we're all set there. Backing up, I won't go through backing up because it has to be done outside of Sage through SQL Server Management Studio. I happen on here to have Management Studio because this is like all in one. This is a server. It's got Sage on. It's got the database management tools. It's got everything. But typically, users will not have the SQL Server Management Studio on, and there's a bit of technical expertise needed to be actually to do an ad hoc backup. So it's better to get your IT support, or you can get in touch with our support to give you a backup. Assuming we've got access to it, we can just jump on and do a backup. And if you don't have the option of doing that, then you've always got the option of, assuming that you have overnight backups, which I hope you do, done automatically at least once a day, then you can say, well, before work starts in the morning, then if we do the VAT return at that point, we'll know that we have a backup from overnight, the night before, to go back to if anything went wrong. So just make sure that if nothing else, you decided to complete your VAT return first thing in the morning one day, and just make sure that people don't go in before you do into Sage and make any changes, because then your backup will be wouldn't be the most up to date. Okay, so I'll skip actually doing the backup. We'll say, right, the backup's been done. And now we can go into the VAT return itself and just review and complete. So if I go back to Sage, Nominal Ledger, period end routines, and into the VAT analysis. So the current period return, box totals there, we've reconciled, we're happy with them, but it may not be the full picture. There's reasons why you may have other adjustments to make that you haven't put through Sage. I won't go through all the reasons, but we'll just go through how you would make the adjustment. Previously, before MTD, then you could just take these figures, not submit in Sage, and then get these into Excel, make any adjustments, and then go on to HMRC website and submit those final figures. But if outside of a group VAT situation, you are going to do your now MTD submission, you're currently doing MTD submissions, you've moved across from the old system, you haven't got the ability to make the adjustments later on. The figures that are going to be in these boxes are going to be the ones that get submitted to HMRC, so they need to be inclusive of everything. In order to do that, you could always do this for the last number of years, but now this becomes more relevant, is you would click on a box total that needs to be adjusted. And we saw this earlier, this is a breakdown of all the transactions, but the third box is where you can put your adjustments. So I'm not going to come up with a particular reason, but you have a place where you could put your adjustment reason. So some text to explain what the adjustment's for. Currently, as it stands, you don't have to put every last adjustment in here in full detail. So you could put one adjustment in summary for the total amount to be adjusted. And as long as you've got an electronic record elsewhere, perhaps in Excel, of the details behind that, the breakdown, then that's sufficient. You don't need to submit, it's not going to submit all the different reasons for the adjustments over to HMRC at this point. So let's add 10,000. You can see currently the figure is 458,969.53. If I adjust it by 10,000, it's gone to 468,969.53. So you could just have one summary adjustment, but you could put multiple adjustments in. So reason 2, and it could be positive or it could be negative. So let's take 30,000 off on this one. So we're then going to go 468,969.53 to 438,969.53. So you get the idea. The key to this is doing it at the right time, because if you do it when you're not ready to submit, you say, right, well, I've done my adjustments, I'll come back and do the submission later. If you close this screen, it will come up and warn you that these adjustments will be discarded. It doesn't save them unless you then carry on and complete the VAT return whilst you're in the screen. So don't try and do an adjustment until you're actually ready to submit. Okay, so I can adjust any of these box total figures, anything with the underline on it, so that I could adjust what gets sent over to HMRC. This, if you are in a group VAT situation, is also the way you would do it. So again, if you want to do any adjustments, do it this way. You won't be obviously submitting straight to HMRC through here, but the MTD submission tool that you would use will use these adjusted box total figures. So you would still want to do your adjustment exactly the same way, even though you're not submitting straight away. Okay, when we've done our adjustments, then the next step is to actually complete the VAT return, because we've done everything, we've reconciled, we've done our adjustments, we're happy that the figures in here are what we want to send to HMRC for the period. Produce VAT return, it just wants you to be absolutely sure you understand that you can only do this once, and you have to tick that box to proceed. Then you've got one optional box. Do you want to delete VAT transactions with a date earlier than XYZ? I don't tend to recommend or advise anyone to necessarily delete transactions at any particular time. Sage do, recommend that you delete things that are a year old. I personally would keep things a little bit longer than that, but that's just me. If you're at this point, you can choose to get rid of VAT transactions, so that the VAT return itself will still be there, but you might then start to lose the breakdowns behind them, those figures, and you know, in other areas of the system where you're using Sage, you're going back a bit further, then the VAT detail will have been lost if you've got rid of it. So I'm a little bit reluctant to say just get rid of it as soon as it's a year old. I don't tend to advise people to delete things at all. It's probably a bad idea, but I'm sure that there's a good middle ground where we can delete things that are maybe a few years old. But it is really up to you. Now, the last one, this is obviously a key one, is what is your next VAT return date? So based on our quarterly periods, that will be the 31st of the 12th, which I can type in or select from the calendar. And that is what we're going to set as our next VAT return. So it's going to recalculate at the end of it based on that date. So this is the point where once I hit this, then I think this is the last point of no return. Click on that. Oh no, there's one more. Check just to be 100% sure. Do you want to do it now or not? Okay, I'm absolutely sure. And as part of this, as I say, because I've switched on the MTD submissions, then it's going to try and do our submission for us at the same time. So we can go through. All right, I didn't get very far, but we can see that, you know, it's going to try and do the submission. Obviously, there's only a certain way down the road I'll be able to get with this before I'll have to cancel out anyway. So I can cancel out, and it's just confirming, do you want to do it, cancel this particular bit? It's not cancelling the whole VAT return, it's just this submission. And finally, if you're on a later version of Sage, then you'll get this pop-up where they're bringing in the ability to attach documents to your VAT return. So you can scan them in, or you can attach them from somewhere they're saved on hard drive, or you can drag them in from, say, attachment or an email. There's a few areas where you can do this, one of them being the VAT return. You don't have to do this now, and if you don't do it, then you've got no option. You can always do this later on. So you're not obliged to fill this in at this point, but if you do want to attach anything to your VAT return, any kind of documents relevant to it that you can keep within Sage and see against the VAT return, then you can do that here. Otherwise, just click on close, and then it produces those same reports that we saw earlier when I was preparing. So again, it still can't produce, there's nothing to produce on the list of transactions not included in the VAT return, so we'll OK that. Then we get our list of transactions that are included. You can spool, export, print those, whatever you want to do. Let's just spool that for the moment. Close down. Actually, while I've been doing that, then it's completed the VAT return. As it says, it couldn't do my submission for me online, so that'll have to be done later. OK that, and let's just spool and close the actual VAT return, although it's not really going to be that much use to me. So what's happened? Okay, so we go back to the PowerPoint just to catch up to where we are. So we've made our adjustments to the box totals, completed the VAT return, set the new period end date, and attached any documents to our VAT return that we wanted to. It's produced our reports, which we can either just close if we don't need them, or you can spool, print, export, whatever you need to do with them. And then we got some post-completion checks to do before we get the users back into Sage. So before we go into the post-completion checks, then firstly what we'll do is just review what has the VAT return done. So by completing that, we have finalized and printed our VAT return. So the summary totals on that current period totals tab and the current period return tab are then reset to match the new VAT period. and the transactions in the drill downs are then obviously recalculated. It's going to be a new list that matches those new totals. So if I now look, these figures have changed in here, and they'll have changed in here. And if we drill down, then we'll now be including a new set of transactions compared to what we saw earlier before we completed the VAT return. Those VAT transactions that were included in the VAT return are now marked as reconciled in the background, so they won't appear on any future VAT return. The VAT return, if successful, would have been submitted to HMRC unless you were a group submission situation. So that side of it's completed as well. The VAT return itself within Sage is moved to the completed period totals area, still accessible and drillable from this tab. Also relevant to me, online submission failures can be investigated and resubmitted from here. So I didn't manage to submit mine at the time. You can see it's come up with a big yellow band to make us very aware of the fact that it was a failure on the submission status. So because I cancelled out, basically we never submitted it, but that's because actually the server I'm using here is offline at the moment, which would explain a lot. Once I sort that problem out, then I've got the option to highlight it and resubmit and have another go to get that information over to HMRC. As I said earlier, if I didn't attach any documents and I still want to, I can also then highlight that and attach documents at a later date through this button. Also, outside of all that submission status situation, it's still completed, it's still done within Sage, and I can still go into this completed VAT return, see the box totals, and then drill into it to get the full transaction detail, assuming that nothing's been deleted, to make up that figure. So I can still drill back and inquire into this VAT return. Okay. The VAT period end date has been updated, so the new VAT period end date is set when completing the VAT return is now in use. So I'm sure you've seen it already, but if we go to, say, the current period return, we can see we're now set to 31st of the 12th, 2017. Historic VAT returns, historic VAT transactions have been deleted if you chose to delete them up to the date that you said on the VAT return completion screen. So if selected whilst complete the VAT return, historic VAT transactions are removed. I've put at 12 months there. That is Sage's recommendation, so I need to make you aware of it. But obviously it is up to you what date you put on it at the time. Finally, HMRC payment, if you enabled it, because I cancelled out, then it's not going to have done any payments. But if you do have it fully enabled to also try and make payments to HMRC as well as the submission, then it will create a nominal payment to HMRC and produce an e-banking payment file as well. Okay, so those are the outcomes. Mine appear to have all happened apart from the submission, which we're aware of. But we also got the post-completion checks just to make sure that we're happy. There's not really a lot to it. Just moving on to the list. Really, it's checking you've got the correct new VAT period end date, which we have, and checking that the VAT return was submitted successfully. Not group submissions at this point because they'll be done separately. Okay, so we know we have an issue with the submission on mine, but that's not something I can resolve and I'm going to be able to do here, but the VAT period end date is okay. So if you're happy that everything's submitted and your VAT return has a new correct VAT period end date and everything's done, no errors, reports have come off, everything's great, then we can say to our users, you can go back into Sage and carry on work as normal, and you've completed your VAT return. If you're in a group VAT submission situation, then you've got an extra step to do because you won't yet have submitted your VAT return. you would obviously need to repeat the same process of what we just done here for that one company, for any other companies in the group that are going to be included in that group submission that you have within Sage 200. So you just go into the other companies and do all those same steps, and then you'll be in the same situation for all the companies. Once they're all done, then that's the point that you would use the MTD submission tool to combine their box total figures into one set. Okay, I'll show you quickly. For those that are in a VAT return situation, let's just minimize a lot of stuff here. I've actually got the MTD tool sat here. I wonder whether it would be happy, because I'm offline, whether it would be happy me going into it. I'll fix it if not. Let's just quickly change this. Right, give it a second just to set itself up online, and then we'll try again. Now, for those who are doing group submissions, obviously you have to register with HMRC first, like anyone does, and make sure obviously that you are, as far as they're concerned, group VAT. And if you have multiple companies, this tool it does allow you to submit for multiple Sage 200 companies, or perhaps you have some of the companies, one or more in Sage 50, and so you have companies, some in 50, some in 200. You can combine that as well. There's a couple of different things that you can do with this tool. I'm just going to go through a fairly simple, again, I can't submit from here, but I'm just going to go through a fairly simple scenario. What we need to do is, I've got two companies, both in Sage 200. So we choose, I've only got Sage 200 enabled for me. If you do have both, then we need to get into touch with Sage and just get you licensed for 50 and 200. But whichever application you're licensed with Sage for, then it will come up on here. So I'll select my Sage 200, and then it will give me a list of my companies that I have in my Sage 200 installation. I've been in the demo data company, and so I will start with that one. I'm going to choose that company, as that's going to be part of my group submission. So I choose that. The next question it's going to ask then is, okay, so that's the company. Which VAT return are we actually submitting today? Now, I haven't submitted any of mine previously, so it's not quite so obvious, but for most of you, then you would find that the other previous VAT returns have already been submitted. So it'd be the one at the top of the list that is false in the is submitted column. So I'll select that one because we can see that's the July through September period that I've just completed. And it drops that company into the bottom left corner. And then at this point, we can see the box totals from that particular VAT return displayed on the right-hand side. But I want to then choose another one. I've got my Sparkles Kitchen company as well that I want to combine. So I can select that one, choose that company. Same thing here. I've completed the September period M1, but it's not submitted, so I'll OK that. And you can see these figures have now changed. So these figures are now an aggregate of those two companies. I can still see them individually. I would just highlight the company over here and show details, and we can see the individual box total figures for that company. So we have 438969, for example, in box 1. And if I then have a look at Sparkle, I've got another 91. Add them together, and then you end up with that total on the right-hand side. In box 1, 530,000, and so on for all the other boxes. So what you have to do is just pull in all the companies and the appropriate VAT periods, and then the figures on the right-hand side will be your aggregated box totals, and that's the figures that's going to get submitted to HMRC. So we don't have to actually write anything back to Sage. So it's really just the purpose is to submit to HMRC. So you have a button down here to submit the VAT return. You can see you've got things like export to Excel, but I won't worry about that too much. And we have the same screen that we had earlier on the VAT return, and you would just follow down this wizard to then select the VAT period that HMRC have for you to tie up your VAT period to their VAT period and do the submission. And hopefully everything goes through correctly and you've submitted your figures and that's done. Now I won't be able to do that here today, but once that does complete, then it will write back to that VAT return that submission status would change to successful where it was failed earlier. So then it writes back to Sage that it's completed the job, and we'll know in Sage that it's been done as well. Okay, and finally, obviously, if you haven't done it already, then the last task is to actually pay HMRC, which would be, assuming that you have a VAT liability, something that you would do through Sage as a nominal payment. Okay, so I think we've got to the end of it. We've done the outcomes, we've done the post-completion checks, and then talking about the group submissions, just a little note there about what we need to do before we do the submission: registering with HMRC and Sage, getting the submission tool that we just used installed, and then going through how to do the submission. So selecting the Sage 200 application, selecting each company and its VAT period that you want to submit, and checking the totals, and then do the submission and check that it's completed. Okay, so that rounds off our little session here on VAT returns and submissions. Hopefully that was useful for you, and we do have other sessions available online for if you wanted to read more about, for example, report designer and year ends. But thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll speak to you again soon, no doubt. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.